Chris Kang is a 19-year-old who has turned his bedroom into a fortress of solitude. Since dropping out of middle school at the age of 15, he has spent 5 years as a social recluse, finding comfort in the glow of his computer screen and the familiar clutter of his private sanctuary. While the isolated life seemed to suit his quiet nature at first, the realization that he would soon be 20 prompted a sudden need to take responsibility for his own future. He looked at his reflection and realized that his physical health had declined during his years of hiding, leading to a deep-seated fear that he would be judged by the outside world for his appearance and lack of confidence. Driven by a desire to make friends and a realization that he could no longer be a burden to his family, Chris finally stepped across the threshold of his room. He approached his mother and asked for her support in enrolling for online classes to prepare for the upcoming college year. The sight of her son making such a monumental effort moved his mother to tears of overwhelming relief, while his father looked on with a proud and encouraging smile. Chris felt a sudden wave of guilt for the years of worry he had caused them and vowed to transform himself completely. He even attempted to join a gym with a personal trainer, though the intensity of the experience was so daunting that he decided it would be better to work on his fitness in his own way. A full year passed, and through consistent hard work, Chris achieved a remarkable transformation that left him feeling physically fit and ready to face his new life. As he stood by his window, looking out at the city, he felt a sense of pride in how far he had come. However, peace was interrupted by a series of notifications from a college group chat where a student was organizing a meetup before the semester even began. The old familiar social anxiety returned as Chris stared at the messages from classmates who seemed so eager to connect. He realized that if he did not attend, he might be left out of the social circles before classes even started. Yet the thought of meeting so many strangers made his heart pound against his ribs. In another part of town, a young woman emerged from a local shop with a large gift bag, humming a cheerful tune to herself as she thought about finding someone new to spend her time with. Back at the designated meeting spot, Chris arrived with his heart racing, peeking nervously around a corner to spot his future classmates. He checked his phone to match the descriptions provided in the chat and realized that the group was already gathering and laughing together. He stood there for a long moment, caught between his desire to finally belong and the overwhelming urge to hide, knowing that this was the first real test of his new life. Chris stands on the sidelines for a moment and wonders if a former recluse can truly fit in with such a vibrant group. He decides to stop overthinking and makes a sudden dash toward the light of social interaction, where he awkwardly introduces himself to the crowd. To his absolute surprise, he is immediately recognized by a face from his past named Sam On. Chris feels the weight of 5 years of isolation crashing down as he realizes the world is much smaller than the bedroom walls he left behind. Just as the shock of the reunion sets in, a bubbly girl named Anna Piat glides into the conversation. She finds his name quite charming and treats him with a warmth that makes his heart race faster than his morning jogs. The rest of the students introduce themselves and decide to head into a nearby bowling alley to escape the biting winter chill. Once inside, Chris feels like he is living in another world where the crashing of pins and the laughter of new friends replace the silence he was used to. Anna notices Chris struggling with his form and decides to take the beginner under her wing. She stands incredibly close to guide his posture, and Chris tries his best to stay composed, despite the overwhelming proximity of such a popular girl. He begins to wonder if he has accidentally stepped into a fantasy novel because his first social outing is going far better than he ever imagined. While the group is busy chatting, Chris notices a small pink workout gadget lying on the floor that looks like a colorful workout tool. Thinking it belongs to one of his new classmates, he picks it up and examines the heart-shaped buttons with curiosity. He wonders what the workout device actually controls and decides to give one of the buttons a quick press. The moment he clicks it, Anna suddenly lets out a sharp gasp and collapses to the floor in a daze. Chris watches in a state of pure panic as he realizes the tiny workout gadget in his hand is connected to her in a very personal way. In his desperate scramble to turn the power off, his thumb slips and accidentally pushes the setting to the maximum level. Anna is left shivering and overwhelmed on the ground, while the rest of the group looks on in confusion, leaving Chris to realize that his new life has just become much more complicated than he intended. Chris remains mesmerized by the mysterious pink workout tool in his hand and finds it impossible to ignore the temptation to see what the buttons actually do. With a firm press of his thumb, a hidden workout gadget springs into life with a powerful that catches everyone off guard. Across the room, Anna suddenly reacts as if she has been struck by a bolt of lightning, her knees buckling and her face turning a deep shade of crimson. The rest of the group watches her with growing concern, but she manages to steady herself and claims that she simply felt a sudden and unexpected chill from the winter air. Chris watches the scene unfold and realizes, with a jolt of pure panic, that his actions are having a very real effect on his new classmate. He starts to tap the buttons frantically in a clumsy attempt to turn the workout device off, but his nervous energy only seems to make the situation more chaotic for poor Anna. He marvels at the fact that such a small and unassuming object could cause so much trouble, and he begins to feel like a character in one of the many fantastical stories he used to read during his years of isolation. As Anna tries to regain her composure, she happens to glance in his direction, causing Chris to freeze and wonder if she has already figured out who is responsible for her distress. The group eventually decides to move their gathering to a local restaurant where they can enjoy a round of cold drinks and good food. Even amidst the lively chatter and the clinking of glasses, Anna remains noticeably flustered and distracted, her eyes darting around as she tries to hide her lingering shivers. Chris finds himself watching her from across the table and realizes that he now holds an incredible amount of influence over someone who would have normally been completely out of his league. The sheer novelty of the situation makes him feel a strange mix of excitement and guilt as he realizes the world outside his bedroom is far more unpredictable than he ever imagined. The temptation to test the workout tool one last time becomes too strong for Chris to resist, and he finds himself fidgeting with the smooth plastic under the cover of the table. He wonders what would happen if he gave the button just a tiny nudge, and before he can stop himself, he initiates another surge that leaves Anna gasping for breath. She clings to the table and tries her best to maintain a normal conversation while her body betrays her every word. Chris quickly buries his face in his phone and shakes his head, desperately trying to look like a perfectly innocent student, while his heart thunders with the terrifying thought of what will happen if he is finally caught. Chris was trying to distract himself by watching a live stream of a popular college girl, completely unaware that his surroundings were about to become far more interesting than anything on a screen. Anna suddenly appeared behind him and leaned in so that Chris could feel his personal bubble evaporating into thin air. She was convinced she recognized the girl in the video and insisted that they watch the stream together, making Chris feel like he was trapped in one of those awkward social situations he had spent years avoiding. In the midst of their sudden interaction, a stray elbow sent a can of soda tumbling over, resulting in a cold splash that landed directly in Chris's lap. Anna immediately sprang into action to fix the mess she had helped create, grabbing a handful of napkins and kneeling down to dry his pants. Chris looked down and realized with a jolt of alarm that their current arrangement looked incredibly sussy to any casual observer, and he began to wonder if his first day of freedom was about to end in total disaster. As Anna diligently scrubbed away at the damp fabric, Chris felt his face turning a bright shade of red while his heart hammered against his ribs. He tried his best to politely decline her help, but she was too focused on the task at hand to notice his internal panic. She paused when she felt a hard object through the fabric of his pocket and immediately assumed it was the workout gadget she had lost earlier. She began fumbling around his pocket to retrieve it, sending Chris into a state of sheer, electrified shock as he struggled to maintain his composure. Chris finally managed to scramble away from her helpful hands, but the awkwardness of the moment hung heavily in the air. Anna didn't miss the chance to poke fun at his obvious distress, smugly suggesting that his overreaction was proof that he had never spent much time around girls before. The jab at his status as a former recluse struck a nerve, and Chris felt a wave of petty frustration wash over him. He decided that since she was so fond of teasing him, it was only fair that he use the workout tool one more time to see how she liked being the one in the hot seat. In a moment of quiet defiance, Chris reached into his pocket and pushed the setting on the workout gadget all the way to its highest level. The effect was immediate and far more powerful than he expected, causing Anna to collapse onto the floor with a sharp gasp. She sat there shivering and completely overwhelmed by the intense workout feeling. Her teasing words silenced in an instant, Chris watched her with a mixture of satisfaction and growing dread, realizing that he had definitely won the argument, even if he had probably made an even bigger mess of things, just as their other friends were about to return. The atmosphere in the room turned from festive to frantic as Minnie and Susan stared at their new friend with absolute bewilderment. They could not understand why Anna was suddenly trembling and sweating, as if she had just run a marathon while sitting perfectly still. Anna struggled to keep her composure, stammering out a shaky claim that she was fine, even though her legs were clearly having a disagreement with the floor. Eventually, the group called it a night, and Chris found himself walking home under the quiet glow of the moon. He let out a long sigh of relief, reflecting on how remarkably well his first real social outing had gone, despite several near catastrophes. He felt a genuine sense of warmth, realizing that his new classmates seemed like truly kind people, even if he felt a little bad for Sam, who ended the night being carried away after one too many drinks. His peaceful walk was interrupted by the sudden weight of the workout gadget still nestled in his pocket. He stared at the little workout gadget and felt a pang of guilt for his earlier mischief, deciding that the best course of action was to find a trash bin and get rid of the evidence before things got even weirder. Just as he was fumbling with the workout device, the night took a sharp and very sussy turn. A hand suddenly reached out from the shadows and yanked him into a dark alleyway with enough force to make his head spin. Before he could even process the situation, he was slammed against the wall by a very determined and still visibly shaken Anna. She loomed over him with an intense gaze, letting him know in no uncertain terms that she knew exactly who was holding her missing workout tool and that she expected it back immediately. The day continued with the group walking through the streets, where the usual post-hangout exhaustion began to set in. One of the boys was clearly feeling the weight of an all-night gaming session and joked that the only thing capable of reviving him would be a hug from the group's most popular member. Her friends were quick to jump to her defense, warning him to keep his distance because she was far too pure and innocent for such bold requests. Anna simply played along with a polite smile, though she was secretly hiding a much more complex side of herself that her classmates couldn't even imagine. Despite the bubbly persona she maintained for the crowd, Anna felt a constant sense of frustration with her overly strict home life. While her friends were busy making grand plans for college that involved late-night parties and newfound freedom, she had to cut her night short to meet her mother's rigid curfew. Once she was safely behind the closed door of her bedroom, the sweet and innocent mask finally slipped. She threw her bag aside in a fit of annoyance, lamenting the fact that everyone else was likely out having a blast while she was stuck at home under a watchful eye. To pass the time, she began scrolling through an online community, only to be completely blindsided by a post that felt very out of place on a standard hobby board. Her initial reaction was one of judgmental surprise, yet her curiosity quickly got the better of her as she looked closer at the content. She discovered a hidden world of people who enjoyed using discreet, high-tech workout gadgets in public places to spice up their daily routines. She found herself captivated by the idea of something so small and unassuming having such a powerful effect on a person. After doing a bit more research, she realized that these workout devices were far more common than she thought, and the idea of experiencing that thrill for herself began to take root in her mind. The story shifts back to the present moment inside Chris's apartment, where the tension was high enough to make his head spin. Chris was absolutely convinced that his life was over before it had even truly begun, paralyzed by the terrifying thought that Anna was about to report his recent action to the police. In a state of total panic, he decided that his only hope for survival was a display of extreme humility. He dropped to the floor in a dramatic, full-body apology, pleading with her to have mercy and promising that he never intended for things to get so out of hand. Anna watched his sudden transformation from a shy student to a shivering mess on the floor with a look of genuine bewilderment. She hadn't expected him to react with such intense fear and felt a bit guilty for coming on so strong in the alleyway. She gently told him to get up and assured him that she had no intention of calling the authorities or holding a grudge. She admitted that since she was the one who had lost the workout device in the first place, she felt it wasn't entirely fair to put all the blame on him. Chris slowly rose to his feet, feeling a massive wave of relief wash over him as he realized his desperate strategy had actually worked. However, the relief was quickly replaced by a thick layer of social awkwardness as the two of them stood in his room with no idea what to say next. Anna shifted her weight and looked around the room, eventually deciding that the best way to break the silence was to ask if he had any drinks available. The night continued, with the two of them settling in with some snacks and drinks to ease the lingering tension. Anna felt comfortable enough to suggest a playful nickname for him, which caught Chris completely off guard since it happened to be the same one he used back in his elementary school days. He couldn't help but feel a bit dazed by the sheer reality of having someone as popular as Anna sitting right there in his private sanctuary, finding it hard to believe his luck had changed so drastically. As the drinks began to take effect, Anna started exploring the room and noticed his massive collection of comics, but Chris found it impossible to stay focused on the conversation. He couldn't help but notice that she still seemed a little affected by the intense experience from earlier, and he felt a lingering sense of guilt while trying to keep his composure. The combination of the alcohol and the close proximity was making him more nervous than he was willing to admit, leading him to realize that his social skills were being tested in ways he hadn't prepared for. The alcohol soon began to take its toll on both of them, and Anna eventually excused herself to find the bathroom while Chris tried to steady his own spinning head. The quiet of the apartment was suddenly shattered by a loud splash and a cry of surprise. Chris realized that his night was about to get even more complicated. It turned out that Anna had a bit of a disagreement with the plumbing and had managed to get her clothes completely soaked while simply trying to wash her hands. Chris felt like a proper host as he offered her some of his own oversized clothes to wear while her things dried, though he felt a fresh wave of embarrassment at the situation. Anna eventually emerged from the bathroom looking quite small in the large fabric, secretly hoping that she had managed to hide all the evidence of her earlier antics before he could notice anything unusual. She sat there, feeling a bit flustered, wondering if he could tell just how many layers of clothing she had been forced to leave behind. While Chris took his own turn in the bathroom to splash some cold water on his face, and give himself a stern pep talk about remaining a perfect gentleman. He reminded himself that he couldn't afford to ruin his reputation before the college semester even started. He took a deep breath and tried to find his resolve, knowing he needed to stay grounded despite the surreal nature of the evening. However, when he finally stepped back out into the room, his heart nearly stopped at the sight before him. Anna was standing there with a look of pure curiosity, holding a very specific and very red personal cardio device she had discovered tucked away in his belongings. Chris felt a level of mortification that surpassed anything he had ever experienced, launching into a desperate and chaotic scramble to reclaim his property before his new life came to a crashing end. Anna leaned back with a playful laugh and pointed out the irony of the situation. Since he had spent the afternoon playing with her cardio tool, she felt it was only fair to investigate his own high-tech interests. Chris was practically glowing with embarrassment as he tried to explain that the two scenarios were not even remotely comparable. He made a desperate grab for the red cardio gadget, but Anna was far too quick for him, tumbling back onto the bed while keeping it just out of his reach. Chris stood over her and tried to maintain some sense of dignity, reminding her that it is generally quite rude to go through a person's private belongings. Anna was entirely unfazed and claimed that she hadn't actually been searching for anything. According to her, she had simply found it sitting there after her little mishap in the bathroom. Chris could only hang his head in regret, realizing he really should have invested in a better hiding spot. The conversation took a much more personal turn when Anna looked at the cardio device and wondered if it actually provided a better experience than doing cardio with a real person. Chris let out a defeated sigh and confessed that he had absolutely no frame of reference because he had never actually been in a relationship before. He assumed his status as a total novice was obvious to everyone, but he was completely blindsided when Anna revealed that she was also a beginner in that department. This unexpected common ground seemed to embolden Anna even more. She looked at Chris with a newfound intensity and wondered if they should finally discover which experience was truly superior. She made herself comfortable on the bed and suggested that since they were both curious, it might be the perfect time to stop theorizing and start learning from each other instead. Chris stood there, staring at the scene before him, convinced that he had somehow stumbled into a dream world because real life simply did not work this way. He could not wrap his head around why someone as stunning as Anna would choose a former recluse for such a bold suggestion, and his rational mind tried to take over by telling him that she must be completely intoxicated. He decided that he needed to be the responsible one and attempted to politely decline by explaining that he was not mentally prepared for a serious relationship. Anna was quite surprised by his reaction and quickly pointed out that he was thinking far too much about the future. She explained that he had misunderstood her intentions because she never actually mentioned anything about formal outing. She argued that the modern way of doing things involved exploring other compatibility first and worrying about the emotional details later. According to her logic, it was much better to see if they were a good match now, rather than spending months in a relationship only to find out they were not compatible in the end. Chris was baffled by her vast knowledge of modern social trends and wondered where a self-proclaimed beginner had learned so much about the world. Anna grew noticeably shy and admitted that the internet was an excellent resource for research, even if one lacked practical experience. She finally revealed the truth behind her sudden bravery, explaining that her incredibly strict family never allowed her to outing or experience the outside world. Since she was rarely allowed to even stay out late, she did not want to waste such a rare moment of freedom with someone she felt she could truly trust. She looked at him with a mix of sussiness and playfulness, even making a small observation about his appearance that left him feeling incredibly flustered. She began to worry that perhaps he simply did not find her attractive, and the sight of her looking so discouraged finally broke through his wall of hesitation. Chris realized that his habit of overthinking was a remnant of his old life, and that it was time to finally embrace the present. In a sudden burst of confidence, he pushed her back for a cardio session. Morning sunlight eventually filled the apartment as Chris took on the role of a domestic chef, carefully preparing a hearty breakfast and feeling quite proud of his culinary handiwork. The peaceful morning atmosphere was suddenly shattered by a loud crash and a pained cry from the bedroom, causing Chris to nearly drop his rice paddle in a state of pure alarm. He rushed to see what happened and found Anna struggling on the floor in a very ungraceful heap, groaning about how her legs had completely given up on her after the events of the previous night's cardio session. Chris tried to be a gentleman by offering a helping hand, but Anna was in a remarkably grumpy mood and decided that her exhaustion was entirely his fault. He attempted to defend his honor by pointing out that she was actually the one who started the playful teasing during their time in the shower, but his logical argument only seemed to make her even more flustered. Realizing that an argument with a hungry and sore girl was a battle he could not win, he quickly pivoted to the universal solution of offering her a hot meal to settle the tension. As they sat down to eat, Anna was completely blindsided by the quality of the food and began to wonder if Chris was secretly a professional chef in disguise. Chris remained as humble as ever, dismissing his skills as basic home cooking, while he focused on brewing some fresh coffee to help them both wake up. He eventually found the courage to awkwardly check in on her, hoping to make sure that her first real cardio experience had been a positive one despite all the chaos. Anna found his constant need for reassurance a bit strange, until she realized that Chris was carrying a massive weight of personal insecurity. He genuinely believed that he was unattractive and was baffled that someone like her would ever choose to spend time with a former recluse. Anna set her chopsticks down and gave him a much-needed reality check, explaining that his habit of being too humble would only give people an excuse to look down on him when he was actually a great person. Just as the mood was becoming genuinely sweet and supportive, the shrill ring of a phone shattered the moment and sent a cold wave of dread through the room. It was a call from Anna's father, and the look of pure terror on her face let Chris know that they were in significant trouble. Anna tried her best to play it cool while lying about being at a friend's house, but her heart nearly stopped when her dad revealed that he was already on his way to that very location. With only 10 minutes to get to a place where she definitely was not, Anna realized that her first night of total freedom had officially turned into a complete and total disaster. The morning officially turned into a high-stakes race against time when Anna's father announced his imminent arrival at her supposed alibi. Chris managed to flag down a taxi just in time, watching as a very flustered Anna scrambled to gather her belongings and make a break for it. Even in her frantic state, she made sure to leave him with a final bit of encouragement, reminding him that he needed to stop being so hard on himself and start embracing a new level of confidence. Those words stayed with Chris long after the taxi disappeared, fueling a sudden determination to continue his personal transformation before his new life truly began. He realized that if he wanted to keep up with the vibrant people around him, he needed to put in even more effort, starting with a rigorous morning workout. He found himself at a local park early the next day, feeling a bit intimidated by the crowded tracks, but resolved to push through his lingering social nerves. While taking a much-needed breather on a bench after a grueling run, his exhaustion was interrupted by the sight of a stunning young woman who looked like she belonged on a celebrity fashion board rather than a public exercise path. She noticed his clearly struggling state and kindly offered him her water bottle, catching Chris completely off guard in his weakened condition. His socially anxious mind immediately went into a tailspin, wondering if this person was a literal angel or perhaps a very friendly recruiter for a strange neighborhood cult. He was so frozen by the interaction that he barely managed to respond, leading the mysterious girl to politely leave the bottle on the bench and run off with a cheerful smile, leaving Chris to marvel at the fact that genuine kindness was lurking around every corner. A full week of college life eventually flew by in a dizzying blur of orientation meetings and mandatory social gatherings that would have normally sent Chris running for the hills. He felt incredibly lucky that he had already formed a bond with the popular students, which acted as a social safety net whenever the chaos of the crowd became a bit too overwhelming. He found himself sitting in a lecture hall with his friend Sam, only to discover a surprising detail about his past acquaintance. It turned out that Sam was actually 2 years older than the rest of them, having kept his age a secret because he didn't want to create an awkward hierarchy among their new group of friends. The morning session took another interesting turn when two striking upperclassmen stepped to the front of the room to address the fresh batch of students. Names like Stacy Lee and Blair Yu began to circulate through the whispers of the crowd as everyone marveled at their polished appearance and confident auras. Chris sat there in a bit of a daze, noticing that the new arrivals seemed to possess a level of charisma that made them stand out from everyone else. Stacy Lee took center stage at the front of the lecture hall and cleared her throat to command the room's attention. She was the sophomore representative and carried herself with a level of authority that made the rowdy students quiet down almost instantly. She had a quick announcement regarding the upcoming membership training trip, laid out the basic requirements for the weekend. Everyone was expected to meet at the school gate the following Monday morning at 9 o'clock, and there was a $40 fee that needed to be paid through the student portal. Chris felt a familiar wave of panic wash over him because he was still barely adjusting to the normal rhythm of college life. The thought of an entire weekend of forced social interaction made his legs shake uncontrollably under his desk as he wondered if he was truly ready for such a challenge. He took a deep breath and tried to reassure himself that things would be different this time because he actually had friends to rely on. He decided that as long as he stayed close to the people he knew, he would be able to survive the ordeal without another social meltdown. The announcement continued with Stacy explaining that the groups for the trip would be assigned completely at random to promote bonding between different students. She was very firm about the fact that no requests to change groups would be accepted, regardless of the excuse. Chris felt like he was facing certain doom as he waited for the screen to reveal his fate. He clasped his hands together in a silent prayer and begged for at least one familiar name to appear on his list. When the screen finally flashed the results, He let out a massive sigh of relief because he realized he was in Group 3 alongside Sam and Anna. His luck seemed almost too good to be true, as he saw that Stacy and the other popular upperclassman named Blair were also part of his small team. He noticed a student sitting nearby who looked even more awkward and flustered than he was, which made Chris feel a bit more confident in his own progress. As the lecture hall began to clear out, Sam turned to Chris and started sharing some of the many rumors he had heard about their new group members. He explained that Stacy was a top-tier student who was always at the head of her class and played a very active role in the student council. The conversation then shifted to Blair, who was a junior with a very mysterious background that no one seemed to fully understand. Sam mentioned that while she was incredibly open and friendly with her attention, there were also rumors that she might actually be from a noble family because of how refined she acted in certain situations. Chris watched the two popular girls leave the room and marveled at the fact that Sam seemed to be a walking encyclopedia of campus gossip. Sam eventually headed off to his next class, leaving Chris with a long break to fill before his own schedule resumed. He sat there, reflecting on the strange turn his life had taken when he felt a sudden tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find Anna leaning over his desk with a look of quiet intensity on her face. Before he could even greet her, she leaned in, and he could feel his personal space disappearing entirely. She lowered her voice to a soft whisper and explained that she had a bit of a problem because she realized she had left her personal cardio tool at his apartment. She looked at him with a mix of embarrassment and urgency while asking if it would be possible for them to go back to his place right now to retrieve it. Chris arrived at his apartment door, with Anna following close behind. He asked her to wait in the hallway for a moment while he stepped inside to locate the missing cardio tool. As he shut the door, he realized that inviting her into his room right now would be a terrible idea because the memories of their recent time spent in his room were still very fresh in his mind. He scanned the floor and finally spotted the small cardio gadget wedged deep in the gap between the bed frame and the wall. As he held the cardio device in his hand, he began to wonder if Anna actually intended to use it during their upcoming lectures. He had a sudden and vivid mental image of her reacting to the power of the cardio tool in the middle of a quiet classroom, which caused his heart to race with nervous excitement. His daydream was abruptly cut short by a loud knock on the door as Anna wondered if he was having trouble finding it. She decided to step inside just as Chris was struggling to deal with a very visible and awkward reaction brought on by his overactive imagination. Chris let out a gasp of surprise and tried his best to hide his embarrassment as Anna walked in and immediately noticed his distressed state. She gave him a snarky look and began to tease him about how healthy and energetic he seemed to be this morning. She joked that he must be incredibly fond of her workout machine if simply holding it was enough to get him so worked up. Chris felt a wave of frustration and insisted that his reaction had absolutely nothing to do with the toy. He looked at her and realized that she was being far too careless by visiting a guy's place alone, and he felt a sudden urge to teach her a lesson about the risks of being so bold. The two of them shared an intense and quiet moment as the tension in the room reached a breaking point. However, the atmosphere was suddenly shattered by the persistent ringing of a cell phone. It was a call from a friend named Sally Kim who wanted to know why Anna was not at school yet. Sally warned her that their next professor was notoriously strict and that missing even a single class would surely land her on his bad side. Chris glanced at the clock and realized with a jolt of panic that they were indeed running out of time. They scrambled to get their shoes on and made a frantic dash toward the campus to avoid a total academic disaster. Much later that evening, Chris returned to his apartment and collapsed onto his bed with a heavy sigh of relief. He felt grateful that his place was so close to school, but he could not stop wondering why Anna had disappeared so quickly after their lecture ended. He worried that he might have upset her by being too pushy earlier in the day and decided to send her a quick text to see if she was busy. His phone suddenly began to vibrate with an incoming video call, which caught him completely off guard. He answered to find Anna lounging on her bed, wearing a pair of pink pajamas decorated with little bears and tulips. She looked a bit flustered and claimed that she had accidentally pressed the wrong button while she was in the middle of playing a mobile game. She explained that her parents had grounded her for staying out late the other night, which was the real reason she had to rush home immediately after class. Chris felt a little guilty about her situation, but his mood shifted when she started snickering and teasing him once again about his earlier reaction to her cardio tool. He began to think that he really should have taught her that lesson when he had the chance and wondered if they should have just skipped their classes altogether. Feeling a sudden surge of confidence, he told her to hold the phone properly. Anna called him a total disgrace, but she seemed to enjoy the playful exchange. Just as things were becoming interesting, a sudden creak from the hallway made Anna freeze in terror. She realized her mother might have just walked into the room at the worst possible moment, leaving Chris to wonder if their secret evening was about to come to a crashing end. The evening took a sudden and stressful turn when the sound of a digital lock chirping echoed through Anna's house, followed by her mother calling out a cheerful greeting. Anna froze in terror as she realized her mother was home much earlier than expected and was already wondering why there was no response from the bedroom. Her mother found it quite unusual for Anna to be asleep before 9 o'clock and decided to check on her, which sent Anna into a frantic scramble to hide the evidence of her video call. By the time the bedroom door creaked open, Anna had managed to dive under the covers, looking flushed and completely out of breath. Her mother was immediately concerned by her daughter's bright red face and reached out to check for a fever, noting that she felt like she was burning up. Chris was still on the other end of the line, trapped in a state of frozen panic, because he had missed his narrow window of opportunity to hang up. He realized that if he disconnected now, the notification sound would surely give them away, so he remained a silent witness to the entire awkward interaction. Even though he could only see the dark underside of Anna's blanket, Chris felt like he was right there with her, as her mother delivered a surprising bit of news. It seemed that Anna had finally served enough time for her previous late-night escapade and was officially no longer grounded. Anna was delighted to have her freedom back, even though she had to endure a lingering lecture about the responsibilities of being a big person. She eventually managed to usher her mother out of the room so she could finally breathe a sigh of relief in the sudden silence. Once the coast was clear, Anna whispered into the phone to see if Chris was still there and was impressed that he had managed to stay so quiet. She was surprisingly eager to pick up exactly where they had left off, but Chris was far too shaken by the near catastrophe to continue. He pointed out that her mother was literally right outside the door, and that the risk of being caught was far too high for comfort. He sat on his own bed dealing with a rather messy aftermath, and decided that he definitely did not want to repeat this high-stakes experience over a phone screen ever again. Anna laughed at his honesty, and agreed that meeting up in person would be much better once they were both ready. She was mostly just relieved that she would be allowed to go on the upcoming school trip without any parental interference. Chris had been so distracted by their recent interactions that he had completely forgotten about the trip, and he felt a familiar sense of dread, hoping that the weekend wouldn't lead to any more social disasters. He decided the best way to end the night was with a very necessary shower to wash away the stress and stickiness of the evening. The following Monday, the group boarded a large tour bus for the much-anticipated college retreat. Chris found himself sitting alone at first, feeling like he lacked the confidence to join in on the vibrant laughter and chatter filling the rows around him. To pass the time, he checked his phone and saw that the feedback on his latest secret digital art piece was overwhelmingly positive. He reflected on how college life left him with almost no time for his freelance work and realized he might need to cut back on his artistic side projects to stay focused on his studies. His solitude was interrupted when a classmate named Sean asked to take the empty seat next to him to avoid getting carsick in the back. Chris was actually quite happy for the company, and his mood brightened even more when Sean casually pulled out a couple of cans of beer to share. Chris was a bit worried about the legality of drinking on a school bus, but Sean logically argued that since they weren't the ones driving, it was perfectly fine. Their secret toast was quickly spotted by Blair, who leaned over her seat to scold them for being such bad influences. She seemed to have a very strict view of public drinking, which made Chris wonder if her home country had much tougher rules than Korea. Sean tried to ease the tension by explaining that it was a very common thing to do, and even offered her a can of fruit-flavored beer that was essentially just a fancy soft drink. Blair was initially hesitant, but her curiosity got the better of her as she reached out to take a sip. Just as she leaned in to grab the can, the bus hit a massive bump in the road with a loud clatter. The sudden jolt sent the beer splashing everywhere, and Blair let out a cry of surprise as the cold liquid soaked right through her shirt. Chris watched in stunned silence as the chaotic energy of the trip officially began with a very damp and awkward mess. Blair was left completely soaked from the beer spill, her light-colored clothing becoming unfortunately transparent as the liquid dripped down. Chris and Sean were both equally flustered, their faces turning bright red as they tried to look anywhere but at her while asking if she was actually all right. Blair remained surprisingly cheerful despite the mess, mentioning that she had brought a change of clothes specifically for emergencies like this. Stacy eventually had to intervene with a look of pure judgment, telling the boys to get a grip before tossing her jacket over to help cover Blair up. Chris felt absolutely drained from the social stress and realized he hadn't even reached the retreat destination yet. Upon reaching the mountain resort, the reality of the weekend set in, as the students were tasked with hauling massive crates of beer from the bus. Chris looked at the towering stacks of alcohol and wondered if they were planning to drink themselves into oblivion before the first night was even over. While he was busy lugging a heavy case, he noticed a group of fit-looking upperclassmen from the sports department arriving for their own gathering. Sam noticed his concern and assured him that their schedules wouldn't overlap, though Chris still felt a lingering sense of unease about the chaotic energy building in the air. The entire department soon gathered in a large assembly hall, where a lively host named Bobby Quack took the stage to kick off the bonding activities. While Chris was busy hoping for a quiet corner to rest, the rest of his team was suddenly ignited with a competitive fire when Bobby revealed that the winners would receive a bottle of premium wine. Sam and Stacy were instantly determined to win at all costs and shouted their resolve to the ceiling. Chris sat there feeling genuinely terrified of the intense energy radiating from his teammates, especially since losers were jokingly told they would have to sleep outside in the cold. The host explained the rules for the first game, which was a classic balloon popping challenge that required teams to pass a balloon down a line without using their hands or heads. The final 2 people in the group were then required to pop the balloon by embracing each other as hard as they could. Chris looked at his position in the line and realized with a jolt of panic that he was the very last person, meaning he would have to perform the final move with Blair. He felt his social anxiety returning in full force as Blair turned to him with a motivated smile and told him they had this in the bag. The game started with a flurry of motion as the red balloon bounced and fumbled down the line toward them. Blair caught it with her chest and signaled for Chris to move in, prompting him to brace himself for the inevitable contact. As they moved together in a clumsy embrace, Chris realized that the balloon was much more resilient than it looked and refused to pop easily. He found it nearly impossible to maintain his composure because Blair was pressing into him with a level of enthusiasm that was far too much for a former recluse to handle. Chris felt like he had been struck by a bolt of lightning as he realized his body was betraying him at the worst possible moment. He was caught very close with Blair, and the proximity was making it impossible for him to stay composed in front of the entire crowd. While he was drowning in a sea of pure mortification, Blair was completely focused on the competition and urged him to hurry up before they lost the round. She had no idea about the awkward situation developing between them, and she gripped his shirt with a level of intensity that only made matters worse for him. Chris finally reached his breaking point and practically begged for the interaction to end, just as the pressure became too much for the balloon to handle. With a sudden and very welcome bang, the red balloon finally popped and allowed them to secure their victory, while Chris tried his best to recover from the sheer psychological damage of the moment. The retreat continued with a series of singles matches, where students showed off their strength with push-ups and various other challenges. Chris watched from the sidelines and realized that his new group members were surprisingly talented in all sorts of ways that he hadn't imagined before. Anna, in particular, seemed to be in her element as she dominated the floor during the random play dance portion of the evening. Chris decided that his best strategy for survival was to remain as still as possible in the hopes that he would blend into the background and avoid being noticed by the energetic crowd. He felt that if he could just hang on until the event was over, he might actually make it through the night with his dignity intact. His plan for anonymity was quickly ruined when the host complained about seeing the same faces on stage and called for a guy and a girl who hadn't participated yet to step forward. Chris felt a cold chill run down his spine as he realized the spotlight was searching for someone exactly like him. To his absolute horror, the sophomore representative Stacy rose from her seat and looked down at him with a gaze that felt both cold and incredibly intimidating. She let him know in no uncertain terms that he was the chosen one and that they were expected on stage immediately to represent their group for the final event. Chris stood up with his heart racing because he felt that Stacy was even more frightening than a complete stranger. The host announced that the next challenge would be a special pair event involving Princess Carry squats, which was essentially Chris's worst nightmare come to life. He found himself standing in the center of the hall, where he had to lift the refined and terrifying Stacy into his arms, while the entire department looked on in anticipation. The Princess Carry challenge is finally underway, and Chris finds himself in a situation that is socially perilous. As he lifts Stacy into his arms, she starts to regret her choice of attire because the contact feels quite awkward. Chris is mostly focused on the fact that she is surprisingly light, but he knows that one wrong move in this risky position could lead to a total disaster. He tells himself to stay focused on the game as the room fills with the sound of teams dropping out one by one. By the time the host reaches number 8, only Chris and one other student are left standing. Stacy is genuinely impressed by his hidden strength and wonders if his previous efforts to get fit are finally paying off. Chris tries to play it cool, but he can feel his hands getting sweaty, which makes him worry that he might accidentally let her slip. He manages to adjust his grip just in time, although the constant contact begins to trigger a very natural and very awkward bodily reaction. Chris realizes with a jolt of pure panic that he is in a major crisis because his body is betraying him in front of the entire department. He knows that if anyone notices his current state, his college life will be over before it even starts. In a moment of desperate inspiration, he decides to lean forward and press himself against Stacy to hide the evidence of his embarrassment. Stacy is completely blindsided by his sudden move, but Chris whispers a frantic apology and explains that it is just a reaction he cannot control. Even though Stacy is visibly flustered, her competitive spirit takes over, and she lets him know that he is dead if they do not secure first place. Chris promises to win no matter what and grits his teeth against the mounting exhaustion in his legs. The tension in the room is high until the other team finally loses their balance and crashes to the floor. Chris and Stacy are declared the champions, and he finally lets out a heavy breath while Stacy pats him on the back for a job well done. The victory feels even sweeter when they realize the prize is a bottle of whiskey worth an incredible $1,000. The rest of the students are suddenly very eager to be part of the winning group, and they gather around to marvel at the expensive drink. Chris feels a rare sense of belonging, as he realizes it has been years since he was able to hang out and have fun like this. A girl named Emily even starts flirting with him by rubbing his arm and calling him a hottie, which causes the others to boo her for being so bold with a freshman. However, the high of the victory begins to fade when Chris hears the familiar sound of snickering from the shadows. He catches fragments of a conversation where people are whispering that he is not actually handsome at all. They laugh and claim that he is just a chubby guy who happens to look like a bear, which strikes a deep chord of his old insecurity. Chris stares at the cluttered table in front of him as the weight of the earlier insults begins to settle in his chest. The familiar sound of snickering triggers a wave of nausea, and he realizes that he needs to find a restroom or a quiet place immediately. He makes a sudden and desperate dash away from the crowd, leaving his classmates to wonder if he is actually feeling okay. Blair watches him go with a worried expression as she holds her drink, wondering what could have caused such a sudden change in his mood. Outside in the cool night air, Chris leans against a wall and tries to steady his shaking hands under the moonlight. He reflects on how frustrating it is to feel fine 1 minute only for his past trauma to come flooding back without any warning. He wonders if he will have to live like this forever, but his internal struggle is interrupted by a soft voice calling out to him. He turns to find Blair standing there, looking like a vision in the darkness, as she explains that the gathering was quite boring without his company. She shivers in the cold night air, and Chris instinctively reaches out to grab her hands, only to find that they are nearly freezing. Blair is caught off guard by his sudden boldness, and they share a cardio moment as her warmth begins to calm his frantic mind. Blair breaks the tension by observing that his glasses do not actually seem to be prescription lenses. She notices that there is no distortion when she looks into his eyes, and she asks him the real reason for wearing them. Chris feels a sudden jolt of pain as he remembers the girl from his past who used to make his life a living nightmare. He realizes that, after everything he went through, it became almost impossible to look people directly in the eyes without a shield to protect him. He clenches his fist and struggles to find the words, while the painful memories threaten to pull him back into the dark. Blair seems to sense that she has struck a sensitive nerve, and she leans in to let him know that she is there for him, regardless of his secrets. Then they started an intense cardio session. The night air remains thick, with an unexpected tension, as seems to be struggling with her own internal whirlwind, while her face glows a deep shade of crimson in the moonlight. Meanwhile, Stacy has wandered away from the warmth of the group because she realized that Chris was taking an unusually long time to return from his trip to the restroom. She finds herself shivering violently in the mountain chill and regrets the fact that she did not bring a jacket to handle the biting evening breeze. As she moves through the shadows, Stacy is suddenly halted by a series of strange, muffled sounds echoing from around the corner of the building. She pauses to consider what could possibly be making such odd noises in the middle of the night and feels a wave of curiosity mixed with a bit of dread. She decides to investigate further and carefully creeps toward the source of the sound, hoping to find her missing classmate. When she finally peeks around the wall, her eyes go wide with absolute shock at the sight before her. Stacy finds herself staring at a scene that looks far more sussy than anything she ever could have imagined. In the dim light, she sees Chris and Blair locked in an intense cardio session that leaves her mind racing with a very specific and very awkward conclusion. She immediately covers her mouth to stifle a cry of disbelief as she watches them together against the stone wall. The sound of a rustling bush sends a jolt of pure electricity through Chris, making him jump as if he just heard a ghost. He frantically looks around and catches a glimpse of Stacy's retreating form as she makes a desperate dash back toward the main building. Chris feels his heart sink into his shoes because he has no idea how long she was standing there, or exactly how much of their awkward cardio encounter she witnessed. He realizes that if Stacy tells anyone what she saw, his reputation will be in total ruins before he even finishes his first week of school. Blair is completely oblivious to the spectator and wonders if someone was actually there, but Chris decides it is best to keep her in the dark to avoid any unnecessary worrying. As they begin to walk back toward the group, Blair seems to be having a bit of a disagreement with her own legs, which have turned into something resembling jelly. Chris feels a sudden wave of guilt and wonders if he was a bit too rough with her earlier, but Blair surprises him by admitting that she actually enjoyed the intense experience despite her shaky knees. Chris lets out a heavy sigh as he thinks about the rumors that are likely already spreading like wildfire through the retreat. He can practically hear the seniors snickering and whispering about his sussy interactions, and he concludes that he will probably just have to spend the rest of the semester groveling for forgiveness. Just as he is drowning in his own thoughts, he feels a soft tug on his sleeve and finds Blair looking up at him with a mix of concern and sweetness. She realizes that Chris is still dwelling on the mean comments the seniors made about his appearance earlier in the evening. She tells him that those people are just being ugly and that he should not pay any mind to their insults because he is actually much better than any of them. Chris is genuinely touched by her words and realizes that she did not just follow him outside because of the whiskey, but because she was honestly worried about his well-being. Feeling a sudden burst of warmth toward her, Chris reaches out to give her a gentle head pat, which makes Blair glow with a satisfied smile. She decides that since he is feeling better, it is the perfect time to give him a little bit of a makeover. Before he can react, she reaches up and yanks the glasses right off his face, tucking them away in a very secure spot in her dress. She looks at his surprised expression and tells him that she knew he would look much more handsome without the extra hardware hiding his eyes. Chris feels a bit vulnerable without his glasses and asks if he can have them back, but Blair remains firm in her belief that he looks much better without them. She wonders if he truly trusts her judgment and reminds him of the advice she gave earlier about having more confidence and not putting himself down. Chris realizes that she has a point, even if it feels strange to have his eyes so exposed to the world. Blair decides the conversation is officially over and heads back to the room while making it clear that the glasses are staying with her for safekeeping. Chris watches her walk away and realizes that he is increasingly finding himself caught up in her energetic pace. His quiet walk back is interrupted when he runs into Sam, who looks like he wants the ground to swallow him whole. Sam finally finds the courage to apologize for the day he turned his back on Chris during their middle school years. This sudden confession brings back the stinging memory of a 10-year friendship being shattered by a single moment of fear. Chris reflects on how much it hurt to be betrayed by his best friend, especially in an environment where physical strength mattered more than the law. He tells Sam that while he does not quite know how they should act around each other, now they can at least manage a polite greeting if they happen to cross paths. Chris feels a strange sense of pride in how he handled the situation and realizes that he might actually be cooler than he used to think. He eventually makes his way back to the main room, only to find a scene that resembles a battlefield of poor choices. His classmates are scattered across the floor in various states of unconsciousness, and the air is heavy with the aftermath of their celebrations. Sean manages to wake up just long enough to explain that their drinking game became way too competitive before he collapses back into a deep sleep. Chris stares at the mountains of empty bottles and cans with a sense of disbelief and feels his own head starting to ache just from the sight of the mess. He realizes that everyone has officially passed out for the night and decides to join the slumbering heap. The next morning, the sunlight fills the room and reveals a chaotic tangle of limbs as the group slowly begins to stir. Chris wakes up, feeling every bit of the physical toll the retreat has taken on his body, and starts searching for his missing glasses before remembering they are still with Blair. He decides that the best way to clear his foggy mind is to step outside for a brisk morning run. He appreciates how much fresher the countryside air feels compared to the city and finds his rhythm along the quiet path. His peaceful jog comes to a sudden and very physical halt when he accidentally crashes into another person with enough force to send them both stumbling. He is shocked to find himself staring at the same beautiful girl who once offered him water at the neighborhood park. She recognizes him immediately and seems delighted to see the guy who usually struggles through his morning workouts. They introduce themselves, and Chris learns that her name is Sarah An and that she is actually a senior in the sports science department at his same university. As the morning conversation continues, Chris lets Sarah know that she is welcome to speak casually with him since she is an upperclassman. Sarah is surprised by his humble nature and mentions how often she sees him out on his morning runs, which leads Chris to scratch his head and admit that he does not actually enjoy the exercise but is simply pushing himself to lose some weight. Instead of being judgmental, Sarah is surprisingly enthusiastic about his diet and tells him that it is an awesome goal. Although she quickly switches into her professional trainer mode, she explains that cardio can only take a person so far and that he really needs to incorporate strength training if he wants to lose weight the healthy way and keep it off for good. The conversation takes an even more interesting turn when Sarah reveals that she actually works as a trainer at the massive gym located right near the campus. She is so impressed by his dedication that she offers to show him how to use the equipment for free whenever he has some spare time. Chris finds her to be incredibly kind and agrees to stop by sometime, even though he secretly wonders if she is just being polite. They share a cheerful goodbye as Sarah waves and dashes off, leaving Chris to marvel at how many nice people he has met since leaving his bedroom behind. The peaceful moment is soon replaced by the reality of the retreat ending, and Chris finds himself back on the tour bus for the long ride home. As he leans his head against the seat, he reflects on the fact that while the trip only lasted 2 days, it felt like a lifetime of drama packed into 48 hours. His mind begins to wander through a highlight reel of his own social disasters, starting with his very visible reaction during the balloon popping game. He then moves on to the even more stressful memory of his midnight interaction with Anna, which resulted in them getting caught by Stacy in the most awkward way possible. A full week passes, and Chris is finally starting to feel like a regular student until his professor drops the ultimate academic bombshell. The class is assigned a major group project focused on foreign perceptions of Korean culture, and the professor makes it clear that the teams have already been assigned at random. Chris feels a familiar sense of dread as he scans the list on the big screen, and his heart nearly stops when he sees the results for Group 1. He realizes with a jolt of pure panic that he has been paired with Stacy Lee, which is essentially his worst nightmare coming true. Across the room, Stacy lets out a heavy groan and leans her head on her hand, clearly realizing that she is now stuck working with the same guy she saw in the bushes just a few days ago. Chris finds himself sitting in a lecture hall realizing that his assigned group for the big project is an absolute disaster. While he is trying to take the situation seriously, one of his teammates is completely lost in a mobile game, while the other two are so busy flirting that they have forgotten they are even in a classroom. To make matters worse, Stacy Lee is sitting right next to him but refuses to even glance in his direction, leaving Chris to wonder if his social life is about to go down in flames before the semester really begins. He considers the desperate move of asking the professor for a new group assignment, but his internal debate is cut short when Stacy suddenly stands up and commands him to follow her outside for a private conversation. Chris follows her with a heavy sense of dread, convinced that she is about to confront him about the awkward situation she witnessed back at the mountain retreat. He is ready to offer a full apology for his existence, but Stacy surprises him by revealing that she has kept his secret safe and has no intention of spreading rumors about what she saw between him and Blair. She explains that she is only bringing it up because his constant nervous glancing during the lecture was becoming a distraction that might affect their upcoming project. Chris tries to dig a little deeper to find out exactly how much of the scene she caught, but this only causes Stacy to have a vivid and very flustered mental realization of the event. Her face turns a bright shade of crimson as she tells him to stop talking immediately and focus entirely on their academic responsibilities. The day of the official project meeting arrives at a local coffee shop, and Chris realizes that his earlier fears about his teammates were completely justified. He scrolls through a series of increasingly ridiculous excuses in the group chat, ranging from sudden family emergencies to broken computers, before the final member simply leaves the conversation altogether. Stacy arrives to find that they are the only two people who actually bothered to show up, and she lets out a long sigh of frustration at their missing partners. Chris suggests reporting the situation to the professor, but Stacy points out that their instructor is notoriously strict and considers teamwork to be a vital part of the grade, regardless of who actually does the work. Stacy decides that their only option for survival is to carry the weight of the project themselves, and she settles into her seat with a renewed sense of determination. As she stretches and prepares to dive into the research, Chris finds his focus drifting away from the books and toward Stacy's vibrant energy. He ends up in a bit of a daze, nearly losing his train of thought as he watches her get comfortable at the table. He eventually manages to snap back to reality and presents her with the massive amount of data he has already gathered on his laptop. Stacy is genuinely impressed that he managed to find so much information so quickly and leans in very close to examine the results on the screen. The close proximity of such a popular and focused girl makes Chris feel like his heart is trying to escape his chest, but he manages to stay professional as they go through the materials together. Stacy finds his research to be remarkably thorough and realizes that they might actually be able to pull off a great grade despite their lazy teammates. As the sun begins to set and the cafe grows quiet, the tension between them finally begins to ease into something more comfortable. Stacy looks at the progress they made and realizes that Chris is actually a very reliable partner. She decides to reward his hard work by offering to treat him to a nice dinner, letting him know that he has more than earned a break after such a productive afternoon. Chris and Stacy settle into a lively restaurant where the sound of sizzling meat fills the air, and Stacy encourages him to eat his fill. She reminds him that as a freshman, it is practically his duty to let his seniors treat him to a meal, which helps ease the lingering tension from their earlier project discussion. Chris finds himself actually enjoying the company and feels a strange sense of camaraderie growing between them, while he realizes that life without his glasses is not as terrifying as he once thought. The quiet atmosphere is suddenly shattered when Chris's phone begins to vibrate with a call from Anna, who is apparently out drinking with friends nearby. Anna is feeling particularly bold and suggests dropping by his place for a second round of their earlier antics, while making some very detailed comments about how much she enjoyed his strength. Chris is frozen in place as he realizes that the phone is loud enough for Stacy to hear every single word. Stacy ends up choking on her drink and spraying it across the table in a fit of pure shock, while Chris desperately tries to explain that they are not actually in a relationship. This admission only leaves Stacy even more bewildered, because she cannot understand why he would be involved in such intense situations with someone who is just a classmate. To cope with the overwhelming awkwardness of the conversation, she begins to finish her drinks at a record pace, despite Chris's best efforts to slow her down. It does not take long for the alcohol to win the battle, and Stacy soon collapses onto the table in a deep and immovable sleep. Chris finds himself in the unenviable position of having to piggyback his unconscious senior through the streets, while her constant shifting makes it impossible for him to remain calm. He asks her repeatedly for her address so he can call a cab, but Stacy insists that the movement of a car would be a disaster for her current state. When he finally manages to get her to point toward her destination, she indicates a brightly lit building standing under the moonlight. Chris stares at the sign in disbelief as he realizes she is pointing at a local place and claiming that it is the place she calls home. Chris finds himself standing in the quiet room, observing Stacy as she lies across the bed in a state of relaxed disarray. He reflects on how she usually carries herself with such a strict and professional aura, yet seeing her like this makes him realize she has a much softer and more approachable side. He finds himself staring a bit longer than he probably should, mesmerized by the contrast between her usual self and her current state. The silence is broken when Stacy begins to stir, complaining about the heat and absent-mindedly adjusting her clothing to find a more comfortable position. The sight is more than enough to send Chris into a state of internal panic, and he concludes that his only hope for maintaining his dignity is to make a swift exit. He offers a quick and nervous goodbye, telling her to get some rest as he prepares to bolt for the door. However, his escape is cut short when Stacy's hand suddenly shoots out and firmly grips his arm, preventing him from moving an inch. She looks up at him with a surprisingly sharp gaze and wonders aloud why he is in such a hurry to leave her all alone. Chris is stunned to realize that she might not have been nearly as intoxicated as she led him to believe during their long walk. Stacy lets out a playful pout and reminds him of the cardio scene she witnessed between him and Blair at the retreat, suggesting that his current shyness feels a bit performative. Chris feels a wave of frustration and tries to argue that the previous incident was entirely initiated by the other girl and that he didn't really have a choice in the matter. Stacy is completely unfazed by his excuses and commands him to take a seat on the bed beside her. As he reluctantly settles down, she mentions that she caught him sneaking glances at her the entire time they were supposed to be working on their research at the cafe. Chris attempts a desperate and clumsy denial, but his nervous energy only makes his true feelings even more obvious. Stacy decides to take pity on him and suggests that since he was so curious earlier, he might as well take the opportunity to see whatever he was looking for. Then they started an intense cardio session. The next morning finds Chris and Stacy walking side by side in a state of thick and undeniable awkwardness as they process the wild turn of events from the previous night. Chris reflects on how they both ended up passing out and sleeping right through the morning, leaving him to wonder about all the things they might have done if the place checkout time had not intervened. Even after waking up, the atmosphere between them feels heavily charged with a million unsaid thoughts, and Chris can only hope that he did not accidentally forget any vital details of their time together. As they prepare to go their separate ways, Stacy turns to him and notes that they will be working together again for the next project as well. She gives him a meaningful look and tells him that he should focus on keeping his stamina up for their future cardio sessions, which leaves Chris feeling more flustered than ever. He watches her walk away with a confident wave and realizes that his social life has taken a very unexpected turn toward the fast lane. The interaction leaves Chris deep in thought as he begins to connect the dots between his experiences with Anna and his growing connection with Stacy. He is struck by the sudden and overwhelming realization that he might actually be the type of guy that girls find attractive, even if he still sees himself as a former recluse. He takes a moment to examine his reflection in a nearby window and decides that he really isn't doing too bad in the looks department, especially since his mother always told him he was the most handsome boy in the world. With his self-confidence reaching a new high, Chris decides that if he can just get his body into peak physical condition, he might truly be able to stir things up on campus. This newfound motivation leads him directly to the front doors of the massive fitness center that Sarah mentioned during their morning run. He feels a familiar wave of social anxiety about entering such a high-energy environment for the first time, but he reminds himself that he cannot achieve a total transformation by staying inside his comfort zone. Once inside the gym, he is immediately greeted by the sight of impressive equipment and a woman who looks like she has spent her entire life training for perfection. He notices her finishing an intense set on the bench press and realizes it is none other than Sarah herself, who looks even more intimidating in her workout gear. She catches sight of him and offers a bright, welcoming smile while wiping away the sweat from her grueling session. She seems genuinely delighted that he actually bothered to show up at her workplace. Chris finds his nerves beginning to settle as he prepares to start the next chapter of his physical transformation. Chris arrives at the gym and attempts to act casual by claiming he was only passing by for a quick look. But Sarah is not about to let him escape without a proper warm-up. He realizes that he forgot to bring any workout clothes, but she quickly dismisses the excuse by pointing out that the front desk provides rental gear for anyone who needs it. After a quick trip to the locker room, Chris emerges in his new outfit and realizes that the clothes might be a little too oversized for his frame. His quiet contemplation is interrupted by Sarah, who insists that they start with a full body scan to get an accurate reading of his current physical state. Standing on the scanning platform feels a bit embarrassing for someone who spent years in isolation, but Chris manages to stay composed while the machine does its work.